What's going on, Saints fans? Inside Black and Gold, Steve Geller, Jeff Nowak coming at you with another pre-draft edition, getting closer and closer to the big 3-day event. And also that means Jazz Fest is around the corner too. But anyway, we are here inside Black and Gold. And man, oh man, I guess you could say this all the time, Jeff, but the weather has just been so crazy. I don't know whether to leave the house in a coat or shorts.
It's cold now.
Yeah.
What happened? It was so warm. And now it's cold. It's funny because I've been training for the Crescent City Classic, so I don't die. And it's been funny because I was on a really good track, like time wise, because I'm trying to break 9 minutes a mile, which is my not that bold goal. So I can say I did something, and I was on like a really good trajectory to get there. And then like over the last 2 weeks, every time I go for a run, I'm like dying. I'm like, what is happening? Did I just would my body just regress? And then it got cold again. And yesterday I hit my pace. I hit like 53 minutes, which is, 840, 850 a mile. And I was like, oh, so it's just the humidity or whatever, the temperature completely took away all of my ability to run. So now it's like, okay, hopefully it's cold on race day, because I was like dying on I was at a point where I could run like 6 miles comfortably, and it was just a pace thing. And then over the last 2 weeks, it was like I can barely go 4 miles without dying because I sweat a ton. I'm a sweaty person, so that's where I am mentally. But so if anyone wants to check on my time to see whether I'm mad or not, go ahead and do that after the race. It's on April.
Who knows how long this spell of cold will last, though.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's perfect running weather. So
yeah, for sure.
And the thing is, like, when I die on a 4 mile run, I'm still getting the work in. It's just a 4 mile run when it's hot and humid feels like an 8 mile run when it's like actually good temperatures. So we'll see. The good news is it's completely flat, which, where I grew up in Connecticut, it's like, one time I went home to visit and I went for a run. It was last year, and it's like, you're going like straight uphill, straight downhill, straight uphill, straight downhill. My run yesterday, I ran 6 miles. My watch told me I gained 112 feet in elevation throughout the entire run, which is basically like that's as far as like going up like a flight of stairs once every like hour. It's nothing. Anyway, that's where I'm at. So I'm feeling good, but that's where we are.
Hopefully the Saints are feeling good. The draft, like I said, coming around the corner, baby.
I also did pick the NCAA tournament champion for the third year in a row. So just throwing that out there. But yeah, it's draft time. So let's talk about draft, not the Crescent City Classic or the NCAA tournament or the Red Sox, who are suddenly good again. I'm happy. I'm enjoying that. But, we're going to do a mock draft. So this is going to be our 3.0 mock. As I mentioned, this is going to be the mock where we trade. So Steve's going to trade up. I'm going to trade down. We're going to see what that looks like. That's going to be segment 2 is Steve's mock. Segment 3 is my mock. It's going to be a little longer because trading down, I wanted to see what happened with the trade down. Whereas trading up, it's obviously you get fewer picks. So there's lots to talk about. But in this first segment, I wanted to do a rundown. There's really no news. This is the quiet time of year. The Saints are getting ready to start their offseason conditioning program. That's about it. Derek Carr did make an appearance in the world. We do know that he's alive. That is something that we can say definitively is he is still alive. But so we're going to talk about the one bit of news that happened. Then I want to go through, okay, so who are the top 30 visits the Saints have had in so far and kind of what does that tell us? So we'll get into a lot of that. But the one bit of news that has come out in this week, it's not even directly related to the Saints, but it's that Terron Armstead, who you all know and remember fondly, I'm sure. He has officially retired from the NFL. He spent his last 3 seasons with the Dolphins, his first 9 with the Saints. He was a 3rd-round pick out of Arkansas Pine Bluff in, I want to say, 2014. I think that's right. He set the NFL combine record for 40-yard dash for an offensive lineman. He was that dude. He's a pretty good rapper. The only thing that really undid his career in general was injuries. He was hurt a lot. I think he had 3 of his 9 seasons with the Saints. He played 10 or fewer games. But when he was out there, he was a star. So, it's kind of interesting because the only blemish to me is that the Saints were never able to get him a ring. But he's not the reason. He's not the guy who needed to go out there and tackle Stefan Diggs. He's not the guy who needed to throw the most obvious pass interference flag of all time. So, congrats to Terron.
Hell of a career for sure. A fantastic pickup for the Saints. And I remember Sean Payton one time even called him, like he said about Terron, that's the kind of guy I hope my daughter ends up marrying. So that was obviously high praise for the dude's character right there.
Yeah, he was it's funny because those Saints teams from like 2016, even that last, that last 7 and 9 year through like 2021, the last Sean Payton year, it felt like there was a lot of leaders on those teams, independently of like Drew Brees, obviously, but then down the line players, you had so much like leadership where like, okay, what's going on in the offensive line room? We don't really need to worry about it because Terron's in there, right? And there was other, there's other positions like when Mark Ingram was here, on the defensive side of the ball when Malcolm Jenkins was here and Cam Jordan, obviously. And, Cam's still here, but it just feels like the further you get away from those teams, I just don't see that level of, there's a reason you're clinging on to DeMario and Cam and Tyron. And, one of the big reasons is because they are still the leadership core because you haven't really built any new ones. Like who are the young leaders on this Saints team? You don't really have them.
I'd say Alontae wants to be, I think, that guy.
I mean, you have to, I just don't see it. You
have to produce, right?
Yeah, like you have to do it on the field. And I think he led the league in passing yards allowed last year. It's hard to be a leader when you're at the bottom of that metric. So, but like Terron, he walked in day one and kind of had that energy about him. And, it was never a question. Like even a Ryan Ramczyk, Ryan Ramczyk was a really good player. Another guy, they're going to retire the same offseason, which is kind of fascinating. But yeah, even after Terron left, he was never that guy, right? Like he didn't have the persona about him. He wasn't going to command a room. He was a quiet guy. He was going to lead through his play. I wouldn't say Alvin was always that guy. Right. I feel like he's developed more into that as they've lost some of their other core leaders on offense. Like once Drew Brees was no longer in the room, some people had to step into that void, and he was one of them.
McCoy's definitely stepped up too and been a more vocal guy.
Yeah, I think he's probably the correct answer of like who is the most established young leadership voice, and it's McCoy,
right?
Especially at least on offense, because you don't necessarily need it on defense because you still have those veteran guys, but you don't really have it on. It's a young offensive group. The quarterback isn't. Typically, you look at the quarterback and say, "Hey, he's the leader," but that's me making hand gestures on a podcast that most people are listening to. That's just not it. Like you don't have a Drew Brees type leader right now,
right?
Wherever you land on the Derek Carr situation of it all, I don't think anyone's pointing to him and being like, yeah, that is the emotional leader of this locker room.
Right.
It's not. That's where I'll leave that.
And I was going to, say maybe even a Taysom, but he's definitely not a young guy.
Yeah, Taysom's an interesting one, but it's like, I never know where he's going to be or what's going to happen, and yeah, again, it's like he's 34 years old. So
exactly.
But either way, Terron had a great career. Even like these last 3 years in Miami, like it was a bummer to see him leave. I think he wanted to go somewhere where he felt he had a better chance to win. Where there was a more established situation quarterback, and that's why he went to Miami. And the thing is, like the Saints, I don't blame them at all for saying like it's just like the money isn't worth it for a guy who cannot stay healthy. And even in making 2 Pro Bowls with the Dolphins, he still missed 19 games over the last 3 years. Like he was injured way too often to justify that contract. And so good for him for getting that final good, strong deal, right? Like that's an important thing when you talk about a career that only lasts 12 years. Like what's he going to do now? But he got that last contract, which I'm sure helps immensely. But I don't think the Saints erred in allowing him to move on, because I don't think he would have changed anything for them. I don't think he would have moved the needle enough as a starting left tackle, knowing that he missed a bunch of games, to say like, they messed up big time letting him go. I don't think they did.
I guess that rap career is doing well too, because he left 15.5 million on the table from the Dolphins.
He's made a lot of money in his career. I'm sure he's doing okay. But no, either way, just a great career for Terron. Probably the second best offensive tackle in Saints history, right? Willie Roaf obviously is at the top of that list, but he definitely, if he's not second, he's in the top three. And I couldn't even tell you who maybe the second one is. Some people might have suggestions, but yeah, good for him. And he's an interesting guy because traditionally your left tackle is the pass pro guy, your right tackle is the run blocking guy, right? Now that's not the same. It's changed a lot as the years have gone on. But one of the things that made Terron great is he was elite in both of those facets. Like you never felt like running to his side was a weakness. It might have been a strength, right? And he was also your best pass protector. He was just elite at everything he did. So yeah, I mean, Fuaga maybe develops into that type of player. I think he's a better pass pro guy than a run blocking guy right now. But yeah, I mean, when you have that entrenched left tackle that anchors your offensive line and makes everything feel a lot more accessible that you're trying to do. And right now it's like you're kind of grasping at straws trying to get that core group that, they like to think they have. I'm not sure they do.
Armstead definitely a lock for the Saints Hall of Fame. I wonder about the Pro Football Hall of Fame, though.
Yeah, definitely a lock for the Saints Hall of Fame. Pro football is tough, and that's a ways out. He's not a first ballot guy, in my opinion. My question is more, is he a Ring of Honor guy? And it's tough because he didn't get to the Super Bowl, right? Like that's always that's going to be the drawback of a lot of these guys in that era. Like even like an Alvin Kamara, like there's no question he's elite as they come. But when we get into the Hall of Fame conversation, not having a ring is going to be a problem. But Terron feels like a guy who should be up there. Now you're going to add Drew's name prior, but 9 years is long enough. And, when you have a shorter career, it's a question mark. But okay, so I guess the question becomes, okay, who do you replace? Who's your next star offensive lineman? If you're going by top 30 visits, which we can run through here, there aren't a ton of offensive linemen on this list. What I will say is that it's called top 30 because there are 30 of them, not because it's your top 30 prospects or anything like that. You get 30 visits. Now, for example, Taliesin Fuaga last year did not visit the Saints. He was not a top 30 visit. And I think the Saints, not some teams operate differently, but I think the Saints use these top 30 visits in a lot of cases to scout guys further down the line. Because, those first round picks, second round picks have a lot of information. Like you don't necessarily need a closer look when you don't have questions about a prospect. Whereas if you're thinking about a guy in like the third, fourth round, you probably do have questions about those prospects. So I think that's something to keep in mind. But there are guys on this list that you would expect to be, if they're on the board at 9, it's because they fell from projected top 5 picks, which Mason Graham is the big one on this list, the defensive tackle that the Saints brought in for a top 30 visit. And the question becomes, are you looking at him because you're considering trading up, or are you looking at him because you think, oh, maybe he's going to be on the board at 9?
The mock drafts, going around everywhere right now. There's been, a huge shift, I feel, in where a lot of these big boards, at least for analysts, are right now, especially with quarterback. It's been a wild week and a half lately.
Yeah, I do feel like there was a lot more established last year. Like we knew, whatever order they were going to be in, we knew Caleb Williams was going to be number 1. And then we knew that the next 2 picks were probably almost definitely going to be quarterbacks. It was just a question of who. And it went Jaden Daniels, Drake May. And then we knew okay, a lot of these quarterbacks are going to go early. And you saw that. This year, I just don't know. I feel like you could have the 3 quarterbacks off the board in the first round. You could have 1. These offensive tackles, who are people going to overreact to Will Campbell's arm length? Are they going to move Membu way up there? The Saints got a good look. There's a few guys that aren't on the top 30 list, and it's because they're local visits. Your local guys are exempted from the top 30 as long as you don't provide transportation, which is kind of a weird dynamic to it. It would be a top 30 visit if you sent a car to go pick up Will Campbell, but if he drives himself, it's not. And that's why the Saints did their local pro day. So Will Campbell, Emory Jones, Mason Taylor, Caleb Branshaw all came in for a local pro day. So they got to go look at those guys. Caleb Branshaw is the safety out of Tulane. Obviously, the other guys are LSU. But the only 2 offensive linemen that we have on this list, and keep in mind, I have 13 names here that have been reported. That means there's 17 of them. We don't know who they are. Josh Connerly, offensive tackle out of Oregon, and Ariante Ursary, offensive tackle out of Minnesota. Connerly is not a guy that I feel like should be in play at 9. So to me, those are guys that you're looking at maybe second, third round. But we haven't seen them bring in Armand Membu. Now, I feel like when you're talking about first round prospects, typically those are hard to keep under wraps. You see most first round top 30 visits get reported. So we'll see. But I would be surprised to see the Saints land a tackle at 9, but it's not out of the question.
No, another one too that nothing but Kelvin Banks.
No. And so the picks, the guys that I think could be, are interesting for the Saints. Both Texas A&M guys, they brought in Shamar Turner, who's a defensive tackle. He's probably more of a second round look. And then Shamar Stewart, defensive end out of Texas A&M, probably a guy that you're considering at that number 9 spot.
We could get a bunch of Shamars going on. Is Jean Charles still on the roster? Is he gone?
He's gone. I can't remember where he went, but he signed somewhere.
Right.
A few others. Siobhan Revel, cornerback out of East Carolina. He's coming back from an injury, so he's an interesting guy to talk about. He's coming off an ACL tear, so if you're looking at him, you need kind of some assurances. But for the Saints, for better or worse, they have not been scared away by college injuries for prospects, right? Like you brought in Rashid Shaheed as a UDFA, a priority UDFA. He came off his last game in college. He tore his ACL. He came in and, obviously they felt good about that. Kool-Aid McKinstry last year, he was dealing with a Jones fracture in his foot. They brought him in anyway. Kendre Miller, running back. Obviously the injuries have been an issue. They weren't scared off by the knee injury at the end of his college career. Maybe they should have been. So, for a guy like Siobhan Revel, I don't think he's a guy who's in play at 9. But if people start to get scared off by that injury, he's a guy you probably talk about at the end of the first round. If he starts to fall because teams are a little, hesitant to go all in on him and he's there at 40, maybe he's your next cornerback, because I think he's a very good cornerback prospect. Small school guy, obviously people are going to freak out because it's like, oh, East Carolina. But if you go look at the tape, I'm not worried about East Carolina at all. I think he's an elite prospect. So he's a guy they're looking at.
Yeah, and it's always tough, like you mentioned, with the visits. It could not even be for this year's draft. Like you said, it's something down the line when free agency comes and they have like a dossier to pull out on them that they already scouted.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. I don't think you would have a guy in for a top 30 visit if you weren't considering drafting them. Like, it's not like we're definitely not drafting this guy, but we're not going to get a good look. But that information doesn't go away, right? Like, you're still going to, maybe some of these quarterbacks, like if you brought in a Cam Ward, but I don't think Cam Ward would take the visit, right? So it's a whole thing. But so let's go through some of these other lists. Savion Williams, wide receiver out of TCU. Thomas Fedone, tight end out of Nebraska. You also had on the offensive side, Jalen Milroe, quarterback out of Alabama, and Quinn Ewers, quarterback out of Texas. Now, those are going to be the interesting ones. I don't know if Jalen's was technically a top 30 visit. It was reported by Jordan Schultz, Fox Sports guy. People kind of react to, impressive workouts. And one thing I need people to understand is when you are hearing from the Jordan Schultzes of the world, they are getting their information from agents almost exclusively. So when he's saying impressive, it is an agent saying it was an impressive workout. And the agent's job is to generate hype for his player. So I don't even read that part of the tweet. It's just not even worth considering because he wasn't there. He didn't see it. He's saying, I heard from someone that it was an impressive workout, and the person he's talking to is an agent. Anyway, what I will say is, I wouldn't put it past the Saints to bring in Jalen Milroe. I think he would make a lot of sense if you're getting him in the third, fourth round. But Jalen Milroe has accepted an invitation to the draft, to the first round of the draft, which means he feels like, I assume he feels like he's going to be a potential first round pick.
Yeah. That's a bit of a head scratcher too, although we see it for whatever reason. We know the reason, because it's a prime position that everybody's looking for. That quarterback. Some teams get that itch, and they don't want to let it go. But we talked about this, I think, either last episode or the one before that it's not so common for guys to, jump back into round one to get these QBs for that 5th-year deal.
No, you don't see it as often as it would make sense for it to happen. But maybe it would happen. I mean, I guess it even if it hasn't happened a lot, if it was going to happen, that's probably a reason it would happen. I think Jordan Love is the only real good example we have of like a late round quarterback or a late first round quarterback who probably is getting drafted there because you want that team control. Either way, it's like Malik Willis was at the draft and he didn't go until the 3rd round. So it's not like, these guys have a great indicator of like where they're going to get drafted. Cause if I'm a quarterback who is pretty confident I'm not going in the 1st round, I'm not going to the draft. But agents' jobs, again, the agents' jobs are to generate hype for their quarterback. And, maybe they buy into that, even if it's not necessarily true. Because the players aren't talking to, the GM and, like, oh, you're going to draft me in the 1st round? Yeah, totally. Go to the draft. Anyway, so that's where we're at. But I think Quinn Ewers is just as interesting. Now, the Saints have seen a lot more players than just the guys they've had in for top 30 visits. So like they were at Ohio State's Pro Day. They were at Ole Miss Pro Day. We'll talk more about Shedeur Sanders. They were at Shedeur Sanders Pro Day, not Kellen Moore. We'll get into more of that during your mock draft. So, I mean, they have the information on these guys. It's like, but getting that firsthand look is obviously always relevant.
Back with more, though. Was he at Ewers or at Milrose Pro Day?
I don't know about Milrose. He was at Ohio State. I know that. And he was at
Ole Miss. Right.
I know that. So, he's gotten a good look at a lot of these guys. Couple other defensive players who are interesting. Oklahoma State linebacker Nick Martin and South Carolina safety Nick Amanwari. Now, Nick is a guy that I would be kind of surprised if you end up with him at number 9. But if you traded back, like when we're going to talk about this, if you traded back into like the mid to late 1st, he's a really intriguing guy because I think the Saints could really use a young safety. A guy who you could kind of move around and be super hyper athletic. Tyrann Mathieu probably got 1-2 years left. And he's a guy that I would love to have just plant someone right next to him and say, learn from this guy. When you're talking about veteran players, you have to kind of bake in the missed time part of it. Now, Tyrann has been remarkably durable, but he did deal with several injuries last year. So I don't have any qualms about just kind of stacking that position. But the Saints really haven't done that since Marcus Williams. They haven't taken a safety in the top 3 rounds. The only safety they've drafted is Jordan Howden, and he was a 6th round pick or maybe a 5th round pick out of Minnesota. So they clearly would prefer to add through free agency at the safety spot. But if they were going to go after anyone, a guy who has the athletic traits of a Nick Amanwari makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, there's so many we've talked about nonstop about the amount of needs that this team has. I just don't know at number 9 if safety's jumping out at me.
Safety's not a position that you typically see drafted that early. Now he does have some flexibility. He could probably play in the slot, which kind of helps your value there.
Yeah.
So if you kind of consider him a slot corner rather than just a safety, that's something. But, I think it's kind of one of those situations where it's like you see these kind of incredible traits at the combine. You want to get a closer look, kind of see what they have. We'll see. I think Jahdae Barron is probably the better bet if you're looking at a cornerback or Will Johnson out of Michigan. If you're looking at a defensive back at number 9, because you have a guy who can play outside and that's a premium position. But that's where we are. Those are the 13 top 30 visits we've talked about. And just for example, look at Kendre Miller a few years ago was a top 30 visit. Guy coming off an injury didn't even work out for him because he couldn't work out. So, I mean, these are valuable, and we'll see whether they pan out.
Man, you mentioned just with Kendre Miller there. That's a guy, hopefully just untapped potential for, the new regime coming in, just because it's really been disappointing the fact he hasn't been able to stay on the field and the usage when he was available just wasn't that productive.
No, and one thing I'll note from these names is there are no running backs on this list. Doesn't mean they haven't had any running backs in, but there are none on this list. They do have another week to get some of these visits in. April 16th is the last day that they can have these visits. So it's possible that there's more names added to this list from now to then. But that's kind of where you are. And I still think those Ohio State guys are the top options, whether it's Quinshon Judkins or Travion Henderson in the third round, maybe fourth round if they fall, would be my top targets. But we'll get into that as we go. They have had other meetings. Trevor Etienne is a guy that I could see them landing. We'll talk more about that. But anything else?
Marion Hampton's been getting a bunch of buzz lately.
Yeah, he's another guy. I think I've seen some people saying he's probably the second best running back in this draft. Yeah. Now, obviously, we know who the best running back in this draft is. But yeah, either way. So let's wrap up that segment and lead into your mock draft. Again, this is our 3.0 with an asterisk, and that asterisk being trades. This is not an optional trade. This is you're making a trade mock draft, and you're trading up, I'm trading down, and we're going to go through the results. Yours is going to be a lot shorter because it's only one round that we're talking about, whereas mine's going to be 3 rounds. So let's dive in. Again, this is Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He is Steve Geller. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that. Otherwise, stick around. We'll be right back. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. Jeff Nowak, Steve Geller, mock draft edition. And first things first, we are going to do Steve Geller's mock draft 3.0 asterisk, parentheses open, trade edition, parentheses closed. And so first things first, Steve, why don't you tell us what the trade you executed was?
Yeah, when we go through this draft board, you'll see how things shook out. I was thinking I was going to have to make a move, honestly, at number 3, but the 2 guys I wanted were still on the board. I kind of didn't pause the draft, mock draft simulation in time, honestly, where I wasn't able to offer for the number 3 pick. So I ended up going after that number 4 overall pick and sent to the Patriots the 9th overall selection in round 1. Plus next year, a 2nd, a 4th, and a 6th for that 4th overall pick in this year's draft.
It's a hefty trade. You better like that guy.
I like both selections. That's what made this so tough. And I just could not pass up a guy like Abdul Carter for this defensive line. I think he would be a knock it out the park home run addition at 4th overall here. And was pleased to see Cleveland pass on him, and then really shocked when the Giants didn't go QB and they still didn't take Abdul Carter.
Yeah, this is an interesting one because this is a mock that, and we've talked about this. It's kind of the PFF has kind of been all over the place, but this mock does have Cam Ward going number 1, which is not a surprise, but it has Shedeur Sanders going number 2. And we've kind of seen, hey, this has been a question mark of, okay, is Shedeur being viewed as that top end prospect, or is he going to fall a little bit? And there's been a lot of talk about
the Saints
at number 9. They're the draft odds, which it's betting odds are so stupid to talk about the draft, but they have the Saints as the number 1, betting option in terms of odds, the shortest odds. So in this case, you don't have him on the board. It would have cost a lot more probably to trade up to number 2.
Yeah.
Especially if the Browns were interested in taking Shedeur. And I don't think that's on the table. I really don't. I think if he's there at 9, it's a conversation. I would be very surprised if they are willing to pull the trigger and trade up. And in this case, the Saints are looking for a trade, and you went up to number 4. Remind me, what did you give up again?
That ended up being the 9th overall selection this year, and then in next year's draft, a 2, a 4, and a 6.
Yeah, that'd be a lot, and you didn't get anything else back. You just got
just for the 4th overall pick.
Yeah, it's an interesting decision, but it is a clear need. I think the Saints do need to upgrade the defensive line, and you're going to do it with the best available defensive line player. I'm surprised the Giants would, if the Giants went Mason Graham here. What would you have still made that trade if Abdul Carter was unavailable?
Yeah, because the other guy I had in mind was Travis Hunter. Those were my two players that I felt were worth trading up for.
Interesting.
And surprisingly, Travis Hunter falls in this draft.
Drops all the way to 8th in this draft after Will Campbell at number 6, Ashton Genty at number 5, Armand Membu at number 7. So it's definitely some, and you can kind of see like there's some variation in how these guys are landing. One thing that I think is interesting is, so it's like, okay, how interested in Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter are the Saints? Now we know they're interested because they were at Colorado's Pro Day. They sent representatives out there. Now that in and of itself is not stunning, but Kellen Moore wasn't there, which I think is notable. I also think it's notable that they sent quarterbacks coach Scott Tolzien, which tells you they're scouting the quarterback, right? If they weren't scouting the quarterback, he wouldn't necessarily be there, right? The only reason you'd send him there is because you are scouting the quarterback. If you were scouting the quarterback to take in the top 10, I feel like your head coach would be there. Maybe they're trying to kind of pump the brakes to some extent because
slow play it.
Yeah, because when they wanted Pat Mahomes, that kind of got leaked and they ended up getting jumped for him. Maybe that's what they're worried about, is if they project too much interest, then some team might find that to be okay, we're going to leapfrog and go get it. But if you still sent Scott Tolzien, so clearly there is some level of interest. It's just a question of how much. Now, Shedeur did talk about, potentially going to the Saints. Deion Sanders talked about that potential. I do think it's strange that Deion did a press conference at all. Like, why is Deion doing a press conference? He's not like, if we go to LSU's Pro Day, Brian Kelly isn't out there talking to the media, maybe because it's his son. Like, I'm not a huge fan of that dynamic personally. It feels a lot like a LeVar Ball situation of like, let your guy go play professional football and leave him alone. Personally.
Well, with the media around, Deion wasn't going to keep quiet.
It's just, well, that's my point. It's just like, why? Why are you talking? Like, that these guys go do their own thing. Like, they are no longer on your team. I get it's his son, but how many dads of prospects are out there talking to the media anyway? Like, let him have his thing. Again, that's neither here nor there. But so we'll see how that goes. Like, clearly there's a lot of interest. There's a lot of attention being paid to the Saints and Shedeur Sanders. Like, people are talking about it. I still would be surprised if it happened, but people are talking about it. One other thing I think is worth noting is Keith Williams was the other guy out at Colorado's Pro Day. Keith Williams, not Terry Joseph, not a defensive backs guy, a wide receivers coach. So that tells me that they're looking at Travis Hunter and saying, what does he have as a wide receiver?
Yeah, because I can't imagine you're really scouting any of other Colorado's wideouts over there.
Do they have any others that are even worth talking about? Like, I don't know. All I know about is Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter. But no, I just thought that was interesting because you could have sent a cornerbacks coach. Like, they didn't. They sent a wide receivers coach, which I think they'd have to trade up to go get him if they wanted to go get him. But maybe that's because they want to play him both ways, which feels dumb. But hey. I just think that's interesting.
Well, that's what worries me about him. And everyone talking about, obviously, the offensive, defensive abilities of a guy like Hunter. But, I mean, this is the NFL now, so I just worry about wear and tear on the body.
No question. So the Patriots ended up taking Jahdae Barron at number 9.
Yeah.
The pick you traded, which he was my pick in the last mock draft. So I feel a little vindicated in that value. I still think he would be a great pick for them at 9. Tyler Warren would also have been on the board.
Yeah.
If you're interested in that. Shamar Stewart, a guy the Saints had in for a top 30 visit, would have been there. Ted McMillan would have been there. So all these guys who have been very popular topics of conversation for the Saints at number 9 would have been there if you wanted to go that route. Like that list of 4 that I'm showing right there. Jahdae Barron, Tyler Warren, Shamar Stewart, Ted McMillan, all have been very popular names. So with all that said, for that trade at number 4, you better be sold on that guy, because you're giving up a lot, and if he ends up, and it's not, I don't want to call it a Marcus Davenport situation, because you didn't give up a future one, and you were trading up to number 4 from number 9, not, whatever. But it is a situation where if you ended up doing that and going up and getting that guy, and then Shamar Stewart ends up being the better player, people aren't going to look past that. Like, you're not living that down.
No, love the tape of, Carter. And I felt you mentioned with Davenport, also a guy like Peyton Turner can help erase the memory of those failed first round picks that are pass rushers. Love everything about Abdul, the strength, the speed. I've heard comparisons from Michael Parsons to a Von Miller, and would love to see that in black and gold. And I know Brandon Staley would too.
Yeah, no, you would be getting a blue chip defensive end prospect, right? He is dealing with an injury.
Right.
So, it's kind of one of those situations of like, hey, are you going to look past that? I think the Saints would. I don't think the Saints, again, are going to be a team that gets scared off by that. The one question is going to be interesting to answer is, does your prototype at defensive end, at edge rusher, change? Right. Abdul Carter is 6'3", 250, so he wouldn't be in that necessarily that mold that the Saints have gone for. So that would be kind of a shift, especially if you invested that much to go up and get him. We don't know from a measurables perspective what he would have done at the combine. He didn't work out. I think he is a guy that you would feel comfortable in that 3-4 kind of weak side edge rusher role. So no, I mean, I would be thrilled if you ended up with Abdul Carter. My only question is the value.
Right.
If I'm the Saints, I still feel like that second round pick is probably the target of, like, if there's a guy I like in the late first round or the early second round who's falling, not unlike Kool-Aid McKinstry last year, I still think that's probably the most likely location for a trade. And so, like a Gray Zabel, like we were talking about with Nick Amanwari, he got all the way to 30.
Yeah.
Like these are the guys that James Pierce as an edge rusher. Like if you went a different direction with your first pick, like if you stayed at 9 and took a Tet McMillan, right? Maybe you're trading into the back end of the first for a James Pierce, someone like that. I'm just curious, if you were trading in, is there anyone you would have targeted?
I think I would have tried to get back in and possibly, add more to that defense. I love Walter Nolan too from Ole Miss. I know it's like a D-line overload with that. But wide receiver would definitely be another one, a big physical guy. Someone like, you see Philly picking up at the end there with a Luther Burden. Although I've heard there's there's character concerns there because of attitude.
That's always the question mark that people tend to forget about in this mock draft process. Is like, does the team actually like this guy?
Yeah.
Like we always talk about this kind of like Madden-esque, oh, okay, let's just put this piece in here and piece in here and then forget about everything else. But no, I agree with you. I think the Saints need to be adding a big wide receiver in this draft. I think they need to be adding
huge burden either. So
no, it's a big guy's name.
Yeah, right.
Luther Burden the third. It just sounds tall.
Right.
But I think they need to be adding a bigger body wide receiver in this draft. I think they need to be adding a running back in this draft. So wherever you choose to do that is the question. And so, yeah, I could see them, I don't know about Luther, but, one of these guys, if he's there in the second round, we'll see. But all right, anything you want to add before we move on?
No, it was tough. And the way I'm thinking about it now, maybe making that 9 pick and then trying to trade back into round 1 could have been a little more interesting. Like you said, the value, it was hard for me because I'm just thinking I'm moving up from number 9. And I was like, who do I really want to move up from number 9 again to get? And it was really just Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter for me.
PFF liked your trade and they liked your pick.
There's no doubt about the guy at number 4, whoever gets him, I think is a pretty good value right there.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, like, if you're able to move up from 9 to 4 and not give up a single asset in this draft, It's not a terrible move, and we'll figure out next year. Right?
Yeah, right.
What I do think is notable here. So you're still projected for that 4th round comp pick for Paulson Adebo. So seriously. So if you're trading next year's 4th round pick, you would still feel like, hey, we're probably going to have a 4th round pick. It's like when you traded, it's like you traded away a 1st rounder, but you felt like, hey, we're probably going to get a 2nd rounder back for Sean Payton or something along those lines. So I do think that's a factor. So like from the perspective of, hey, how many picks do we have? You're only really giving up a 2nd and a 6th to go up and get the premier edge rusher in this draft. So, I think that is kind of my thing. If you're gonna trade up and give up future assets, you better be getting the closest thing to a sure thing that you can find. And the top edge rusher off the board is in most cases going to be that, right? If you're waiting around at 9 and you're talking about a Shamar Stewart, anything but a sure thing. I mean, that's the knock on him, is he's all potential. He hasn't actually done it, right? So like that's kind of like that's why I'm trading if I'm trading, is because I have too many question marks with the guys who will be available to me, and I want to go get someone with no question marks.
And the only question mark is definitely the foot injury right now for Carter. Other than that, I don't know. I hate to say, plug and play, but he seems like a dude that can come in and rack up 8-9 sacks a rookie year.
Yeah, no question. And I think to some extent, like finding out these injuries before the draft is helpful. Like I would be more, like assuming it's handled and you feel comfortable with how it was handled. And if it was a knee thing, those tend to linger. If it was soft tissue and you're like, okay. A foot injury, typically it's like, okay, whatever procedure you need to get done, get the procedure done and move on. So we'll see. But all right, good stuff. This is Inside Black and Gold. That was Steve's mock. Again, the trade. He received number 4 overall from the Patriots, drafted Penn State star Abdul Carter to shore up that defensive line, traded away the 2026 2nd round pick, 2026 4th round pick, and a 2026 6th round pick. So we're mining from the future. I'm sure people won't be a huge fan of that, but you get a star and we get to talk about a star, and I like stars. Stars are fun.
I tried to do just the 2 and the 4 and the 6 that they needed that as the sweetener, I guess.
Needed it. Yeah.
Yeah.
They wouldn't do it. This is a draft day situation. Anyway, so that's it. That's Steve's mock draft 3.0. It was a quick one, and we will turn around and we're going to be trading the other direction. I'm Jeff Nowak. He is Steve Geller. Mock draft 3.0 trade down edition coming at you. We will be right back. Stay tuned. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold mock draft Tuesday. As it's not alliterated, but it counts. That's what we're doing. I'm Jeff Nowak. He is Steve Geller. We went through Steve's mock in the last segment. He had to trade up for Abdul Carter. My mission of this mock was to trade down, something that is almost definitely not going to happen because the Saints never do it. But hey, every year we have these conversations like maybe this is the year. Maybe this is the time. Maybe we'll do it. And I will say that this is the time you should do it because this is a roster that needs as much help as it can get. But Steve, when you hear trade down, what is your, how do you feel about it? How do you feel in your gut?
I feel great. I've always been on board with accumulating more assets, more ammunition for a draft to hit on. But, from hearing Loomis in the past, I just know that they tend to be more aggressive. And if they like somebody and feel he's not going to end up being available for them, they just go up and get him.
Yes, that is what happened. But in this case, they're not. And so let's talk about it. Let me get this shaped the way I want.
Well, I like our first 2 mock drafts we're doing too, because Shador ain't fallen to number 9.
Yeah. No, and I mean that's a factor, right? Like that's going to be, if I'm trading down, it's because I'm not a fan of how the board has shaped up, right? Because you're almost never seeing teams in the Saints position like trading down in advance. Right. Like if the team's trading up to number 1, you can do that in advance. We saw the Bears do that. When you're talking about trading up to number 9, you want to make sure that the guy you're trading for is on the board, or in the Saints case, the guy you might want has not fallen to you. So you don't want to kind of count your chickens there too early. And that's why it's a tough needle to thread. Because you don't have a lot of time. Like 15 minutes goes by real fast.
Yeah.
So before I go into the trade, let's talk about what the board develops. So in this case, Cam Ward goes off number 1 to the Titans. That's expected. I actually think this is more likely in that the Browns take Travis Hunter at number 2, and then the Giants take Shedeur Sanders at number 3. And that would be a really interesting situation. I think Shedeur would be a lot happier in New York. I think New York would be happy with Shedeur. The Browns don't have to deal with the Deion Sanders show, and yeah, they can figure out their quarterback next year. Yeah, because it's not going to be Deshaun Watson.
They got Kenny Pickett right now.
Ooh, the Kenny Pickett show. Okay, moving on. Okay, so number 4, Mason Graham, defensive tackle, off the board. Number 5, Ashton Jeanty, running back, off the board. So a lot of these intriguing names that I would probably have said, I am not missing my opportunity to draft these guys. They're gone. I don't have to deal with the soul searching of, do I want to draft a running back in the top 10? Because the Jaguars took him.
Interesting here. Again, we're seeing Graham get picked ahead of Abdul Carter.
Yeah. I mean, it's a need thing, right? Like, I think the Patriots probably need a defensive interior player more than they need an edge rusher. But anyway, Abdul Carter goes off at number 6 to the Raiders. Will Campbell goes off at number 7 to the Jets. So a lot of these names that I'm like, this is kind of who I want at 9, they're gone. And then Jahdae Barrett, who was my pick in the last mock draft. He goes to the Panthers at number 8. So I'm kind of sitting there like, hey, like, I didn't plan for this, but these are all the players I wanted. Now the guys are still on the board. I don't really love it. So I go ahead and say, ring, 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 ring. Hello, Miami Dolphins. Any interest in trading up to number 9? It's more likely they call me, because if they're trading up to number 9, it's because they want to. And I say, you know what? Yeah, let's do it.
What you got?
So I send the Dolphins number 9 and number 138. That's my 4th round pick for this year. And then a 2026 4th rounder, which, again, as we talked about, I should be able to replace with a comp pick for Paulson Adebo. So I don't feel like I'm giving up a ton in that exchange. I get back number 13, the number 98 pick, which is a comp pick in the 3rd round of this year's draft, and then a 2026 2nd rounder. So I've upgraded my 4th round pick of this year to a 3rd round pick, effectively. And I have upgraded my 4th round pick for next year into a 2nd round pick. And I've moved back 4 spots. I feel very good about this value. I don't think the Saints are going to do it, but I feel good about it. And so who did the Dolphins trade up to pick? They picked Tyler Warren, tight end out of Penn State. I am not a top 10 tight end guy. I have been very clear about that. And so the Dolphins, they don't agree. They're like, I want my tight end and I want him now. He's not going to be on the board at 13. I'm going to get him. I actually think this trade, as much as it's a kind of, a self-fulfilling prophecy in that I was always going to trade down, is actually reasonable. Like, if a team says, like, I think Tyler Warren is that dude and I don't want to wait around.
Right.
One got him. So I think that makes sense. Next 2 picks, Tet McMillan off the board, wide receiver, gives Caleb Williams kind of that big body connection that you were trying to get with Keenan Allen, never really developed. On pick number 11, Armand Membu, another really good offensive tackle prospect, kind of fell down the board here. And then number 12, Mike Green, edge rusher out of Marshall, goes off to the Cowboys right before I pick with the Saints. So if those 3 guys were guys that I really, really wanted, then this trade was a bad decision. Personally, I probably wasn't feeling great about any of those picks. So, Steve, what do you think about that board so far?
The top tackles obviously gone off the board right now for offensive line. I still think your corner pick is still out there, huh? And Barron, or did he go off the board?
He went off at number 8 to the Panthers.
Oh, he was gone already. But curious to see where you end up going with this here, if it's going to be defense or offense, honestly.
Yeah, and so I wanted to keep this as accurate to reality as possible. So I went ahead and reached for an edge rusher out of a school that no one watches. And I went with Donovan Ezeraku, pick number 13, edge rusher out of Boston College. And I actually really like this pick. Now it goes into the same conversation as an Abdul Carter of like, does your prototype at defensive end edge change a little bit now that you're in the 3-4? And Brandon Staley, Kellen Moore will insist it doesn't necessarily matter. Like, we want the best player and we will make our scheme fit those players. And I agree with that. I think that's true. But right now, you know, and a 3-4, I think people get kind of trick themselves into thinking you need small edge rushers. You need athletic guys on both sides of the line. And realistically, you need one of those guys, at least one of those guys, to be your weak side edge rusher, a guy who's going to play in coverage a little bit more. Like, you have strong side edge rushers, and those are more like traditional 4-3 defensive ends because they're going to play the run more often. But I think the Saints really do need at least one kind of smaller bodied, more athletic defensive end. And I think Isaiah Foskey is going to be your next one. I think that's how he's going to get on the field, is by being that other guy who can. But to me, Donovan Ezeraku, I don't know how many people have watched him play. He looks a lot like Kayvon Thibodeau to me when you kind of see him out there. He's incredibly athletic. He's rangy. He can get upfield. He can make tackles. He's physical. He's a little smaller. He's 6'2", 250, which isn't a guy that if we were talking about a Dennis Allen defense, I would have crossed him off my board immediately.
Right.
You know, a same guy with, you know, like Jalen Walker out of Georgia. Like, I crossed him off my board immediately. I feel a little different right now. Now, I don't need a whole roster of those guys, but I do need one of those guys. And so Donovan, he's probably a guy that I could have taken a little later in the first, but I don't have a pick later in the first. I have the number 13, and he's the guy I want. So I went up and got him.
No, filling that pass rusher need still a huge deal for the Saints. And, you know, just thinking about pairing him up with a guy like, you know, Chase Young, exciting stuff.
Yeah, and I think a lot this pick would be met with the reactions of like, here we go again, another defensive end out of a school that no one cares about.
No, I hear you, right.
And I don't blame you. I wouldn't blame you at all. But I do think that Ezeraku, like, if you go and watch him play, you'll be like, I get it. Because he's all over the field. Like, he's constantly making plays. He was a tackle machine, always in the backfield. Yeah, he didn't run the 40 at the combine, so we don't know, but he did have a 35-inch vertical, 22 reps on the bench press. I would guess he would be in the 4.6, 4.7 range. Like, he's that type of athlete. So that's why I brought in a guy who can kind of transform the weak side edge rusher position, and go from there. Now, again, remember, I added a 3rd-round pick in this mock, so I do want to get all the way there. So to say, okay, this is what I did with it. So we'll kind of speed run the rest of this mock to get to those picks, including the 2nd-round pick. So I'll just kind of go through this quickly. Like I mentioned, Jalen Walker is another guy you could potentially consider. Goes off the board to the Falcons at 15. Will Johnson, cornerback. He was one of my top kind of ancillary options if I went another route. If the Saints really wanted to bring in another outside defender. Shamar Stewart, Mykel Williams off at 18, 19. Again, it's really just a question of who is the top guy on your board. Because if you feel like Shamar Stewart is that guy, I don't know. I just want a guy who's produced. I want a guy who's done something. It's what led you to Isaiah Foskey, and that didn't work out. So, we've missed that defensive end in so many different ways. It's hard to even look at it and say, well, I don't want to do that again. Because it's like, well, what? Do you want to avoid the edge rusher who is a small school guy with all the traits that you want to bring in and develop? Because we've done that. It didn't work. Do you want to bring in an edge rusher who's a name we know and has all the stats in the world, and we just kind of need to get production out of him, and we feel like he's got a high baseline? Well, that didn't work. There's so many things that has gone wrong in the edge rusher conversation for the Saints. And it's like, I don't know if there's a right answer at this point.
No, you're trying to look definitely to erase the memories of drafts past, because it hasn't been pretty.
No, and some of these offensive line prospects go off the board late in the first. Calvin Banks, Tyler Booker, Josh Simmons, Gray Zabel, Colston Loveland off at 28. He's a guy that I find interesting at tight end. James Pierce, Nick Scourton at 29 and 30. Nick Amanwari, Omari and Hampton close out the first round. Getting into the second round.
Like the Eagles need a running back.
Right. TJ Sanders goes off at 38. He's a guy that's interesting at defensive tackle. Tyreek Williams goes off the board. So these defensive tackle prospects that I feel like, maybe, I can kind of shore up that interior line. They're going off right before my pick. Derek Harmon, TJ Sanders, Tyreek Williams. So number 40, ding, 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 ding. Jaden Higgins, wide receiver out of Iowa State. Now, he's a guy that I saw up close and personal at the Senior Bowl. He's a big-bodied guy. My only critique is that he tries to play a little bit more like a small, fast guy. He did run in the 4.4s at the combine. So, like, the speed is there. The long speed is there. He reminds me a little bit of an MVS. Not quite the speed of an MVS, but that's the type of player he is. I don't think he's going to be that big physical guy, but he is going to be that big target that you can throw the ball up to and feel like he can go get it. So we talked about, hey, I want to see them bring in a big-bodied wide receiver. So I end up with Jaden Higgins at number 40.
Yeah, that's when you look at the wide receiver room now, I think that was the biggest knock with, the signing of Brandon Cooks. Some folks want to say he's over the hill, doesn't have the same burst anymore. But the biggest one was that he wasn't this big body guy that you seem to be lacking in that room right now.
Yeah, like it's just he's kind of you have three wide receivers who kind of do the same thing.
Right.
And they do it at varying levels of success. But I don't have, I need some variability in what I ask guys to do. So there's that. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because there's 3 more picks to make. So let's kind of fast forward. Jackson Dart off the board at number 42. Josh Connerly off the board at number 43. Both guys could go to the Saints at number 40. I would have I was very close to picking Jackson Dart there. I don't know. I don't buy it. Trey Amos, cornerback at number 44, going down. There's Landon Jackson and Siobhan Revel at 46 and 47. Jack Besh goes off at 49. Now, this was a guy that PFF got mad at me that I did not take because they have Jack Besh rated higher than Jaden Higgins. And, I kind of went against my own beliefs in that I want Jack Besh too. But I feel like I'm being a homer to some extent, right?
I think it's funny. You got the Bengals who have, spent tons of money in their wide receiver room, adding more here.
Yeah, and they add an LSU guy who was there after Joe Burrow. Never played together. So let's keep going. If they had a Jack Besh there, I would have been just as happy. But I kind of went with Jack Besh is he's a physical, strong guy, but he's not tall. I wanted a tall guy. So I went with the 6'4" guy over the 6'1" guy. The interesting thing is Jack Besh and Jaden Higgins, 3 inches difference, but they weigh the same. They're both about 215 pounds. So Xavier Estrepo off at 52. Keep going. Cam Scatabo at 53. Quinshon Junkins. So the first Quinshon Junkins and Travion Henderson go back to back here. So that's a bummer for me because I wanted one of those guys. I thought one of them would get to 70. Neither did. So that's the Bills and the Panthers back to back. My goal of adding a running back takes a hit here.
Right. I like Junkins a lot. I know you mentioned Travion Henderson. You prefer more.
Yeah, I think he just has the speed that I want. Quinshon is more of that, kind of bruising guy that, either one I would feel good about. Quinshon also has the hair that feels like it works in New Orleans. The black and gold. I would have said the same thing about Xavier McKinney coming up. Ariante Ursery, he's a guy the Saints had in for a top 30 visit. He goes off the board. Tackle out of Minnesota. LSU's Braden Swinson off at 59. Elijah Arroyo goes up at 61. He would be in the guy that I look at number 70. He is no longer there. So we get into the 3rd round. Kyle Kennard, edge rusher out of South Carolina, goes off the board. And Dylan Sampson, running back out of Tennessee. He was going to be a guy I looked at. He's off the board. So if waiting till 70, if you're looking for a running back, might not be the best case scenario. But Saints on the board at number 71. Shamar Turner, defensive tackle out of Texas A&M. So I take the edge rusher at number 9 or number 13 rather, and then I shore up the interior with Shamar Turner, a guy that they have had in for a top 30 visit, the other Shamar out of Texas A&M. So I feel good about it, right? I've gotten myself an edge rusher that I feel really good about, a defensive tackle that I feel really good about, and a wide receiver that I feel really good about. These are 3 needs that I have addressed with players that I think fill those needs and also have a lot of talent to back it up.
Yeah, the only thing I've read on Shamar, though, you got to just hopefully he can manage his temper. Supposedly, is not very good.
Third round, I can't say you don't have like this. When you get into the third round, you are moved beyond no question mark.
Sure.
Right. So if the only thing he can my only issue is like, hey, he's got to grow up a little bit. I can deal with that in the third round. I can't necessarily deal with that in the second round. Right. At number 70 and beyond, okay, fine. Which got 2 more picks to deal with. So I don't want to spend too much time on Shamar. We're fast forwarding to number 93. We have 2 picks in the 90s. So that's 93, 98. One of them is Washington's pick. One of them is the Dolphins pick that I traded for. The Commanders pick that came in, that was the Marshawn Lattimore trade. Mason Taylor off the board at number 75. So if the goal was to add a tight end that you feel really good about, you've kind of missed that opportunity. There's some options, but Mason Taylor was kind of the last one in that tier, in my opinion, and he is gone. Keep going. Chris Paul. I don't know why I always mention Chris Paul. It's not because I feel really highly about Chris Paul, the linebacker out of Mississippi. It's just because I appreciate the name. Scrolling down, Jalen Milroe off the board at number 82 to the Seahawks. This is an interesting one. This is about where I'd see his value, mid to late third, early fourth round. That's why I don't feel like him being at the combine makes a lot of sense. I'm sorry, the first round of the draft in Green Bay makes a lot of sense, but hey, it is what it is.
Clint Kubiak, I'll have fun with him.
Jonas Savaiinaea, the guy I took at number 40 in a previous mock, I still feel like 83 is not where he's going to go. I think he's going to go up closer to the second round, third round. But either way, he's off the board. Can't take him. Keep going. Savion Williams, wide receiver at TCU. He's a guy Saints had him for a top 30. Goes off at number 88. We're up. Wyatt Milam, he's a guy you took in a previous mock. He goes off at number 92 before the Saints pick at number 93. Ding, 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 ding. And I get me a quarterback.
Woohoo!
Quinn Ewers out of Texas. I just think I'm looking at traits. I'm looking at the third round. I don't like if I really like Jackson Dart, I would find a way to go get him. But I personally don't. I don't think Jackson Dart is the guy. He is a guy. He is not the guy. And I put him in the same tier as a Quinn Ewers. I put him in the same tier as some of these other guys. So, Will Howard, like we're just talking about him because he's the more exciting guy and he can run. But I like Quinn Ewers. I think Quinn Ewers is a guy you're going to put in that room and you're going to develop. And so I think at 93, that extra pick I got in the Marshawn Lattimore trade is a perfect time to add that developmental quarterback. And you kind of put him in a room with a Rattler and you let them compete and you'll see who comes out the other side. Personally.
Yeah, good size, interesting prospect. We know the Saints have, had feelers out with interest in him. And yeah, I don't mind this at all at pick 93. That's much better than them, I don't want to say, I was going to say dumpster diving. That's not the correct term in round 1, but I just don't believe at number 9 overall that, a guy like a Dart or, I don't think Shador is going to be on the board, but I just don't want any of those at pick number 9 for the Saints.
Dumpster diving.
Yeah, I know that's not the right term.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a guy who has started a ton of college games, right? Like, I think that's important. Even in the transfer year, the transfer portal era, I appreciate that he started Ohio State, he transferred to Texas, he started in 2022, he started 10 games. The last 2 years, he started 12 and 14 games. He's played in big, important games. It's an interesting one because he transitioned from, the Big 12 to the AC. I'm sorry, from the Big 12 to the SEC. So he's got experience against a lot of different competition, different styles of football. He successfully held off Arch Manning, right? Like, that's not a given.
Yeah.
Like Arch Manning shows up. He's Quinn's the entrenched guy, but if he didn't do enough, he would have gotten sat down and no one would have complained about it. So I think it's just, there's a mindset there that I feel like, okay, he's there to compete, like he understands what a competition is going to be like. So we'll see. And I've watched a lot of Quinn Ewers and I was always impressed coming away from it. Like I felt like he was a guy who who held up in big moments. You know, you would have liked to see him get to a championship game. They lost in the semifinals both years. You know, I just feel like that's a guy that's a quarterback that I would endorse bringing in that range. And the Saints have gotten a good look at him. So if they feel like he's the guy, then he's the guy.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate the value here. You know, that makes a lot more sense to me.
Guy I really like, Dorian Strong, goes off the board at number 96. You know, I was kind of like, okay, do I take the quarterback at 93 or do I take someone else that I like and assume the quarterback's going to be there at 98? I probably should have done that because I would have, if Dorian Strong was on the board at 98, he's who I'm picking. Because I think you do need a cornerback, an outside cornerback to add to that group. Instead, he's off the board. Andrew Makuba also goes off the board, a really talented safety out of Texas. You could have gone Texas back to back. I did not. And so 98, this is the pick I got in the Dolphins trade. This is the extra pick that I added in this draft. I also turned my 4th rounder next year into a 2nd rounder, but we're not doing that. So at 98, my final pick that I will talk about in this mock draft, Trevor Etienne, running back out of Georgia. It's a guy the Saints definitely got to look at. I don't think they've had him in for a top 30, but he is a Louisiana guy. He is the brother of Travis Etienne, who is a star running back for the Jaguars. You know, this is another example of a guy who's played a ton of college games, played for multiple different teams, ended up at Georgia. So, you know, he's got that kind of major school kind of situation, like understands what that competition level is like. Started his career at Florida, transferred to Georgia last year. The production was never really there. You know, he does catch the ball pretty well out of the backfield. 6, 8, 9 touchdowns each of the last 3 years. His career high in rushing was 753 yards. I think he's a guy who probably has more to offer than the stats show. So, I mean, he's a guy that you throw in that room and you have compete with the Kendre Miller, and you see and Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and you kind of see where it goes. But I think that's what I had a lot of things I wanted to bring in this draft, right? And so I got my edge rusher, I got my big wide receiver, I got my defensive tackle, I got my quarterback, and I got my running back, and I feel good about it.
Trevor's coming on home, Louisiana boy.
So it's a homecoming type offseason. Why not? Right? You're bringing in Devon Gottschalk coming back, Justin Reed coming back, Trevor Etienne, come on back. Pride of Jennings, Louisiana.
I just worry about his size.
Yeah, you know, I mean, again, it's a 3rd round, so you're you know, traits are a little harder to find. But you know, he's a developmental guy. He's not, you know, like if I wanted to get a non-developmental running back, I probably would have had to take him, if not at 70, at 40, and that's tough. Maybe trade up, right? Maybe if I really like those Ohio State guys, you know, I take one of these extra picks and I turn it into a 2nd rounder, and I go get him there. But I don't have the screen grab of my players, so just a reminder. I traded down to the Dolphins. I traded from 9 to 13. I got the number 98 pick in exchange for the number 138 pick. And then I got a 2nd rounder in 2026 in exchange for a 4th rounder. At the number 13 pick, I took Donovan Ezeraku, edge rusher out of Boston College. At number 40, I took Jaden Higgins, big wide receiver out of Iowa State. I almost said Ohio State. At number 71, I took Shamar Turner, the other Shamar out of Texas A&M, shore up that defensive tackle spot. Then I got the 2 more 3rd round picks that I got via trade. One, Marshawn Lattimore to the Commanders for number 93. The other one I picked up in this draft from the Dolphins. Number 93, I take quarterback Quinn Ewers out of Texas. And at number 98, I take halfback Trevor Etienne out of Georgia, by the way, of Louisiana. So that's my top 3 round draft class. And there's still more. There's 4th round or 5th round or 6th rounder to figure out. But that's where I am. And I feel good about that class.
What's funny is you mentioned that when we try to do these mock drafts, I mean, obviously the 1st round is hard enough, but then trying to get into like a 4th, 5th, 6th round picks, it's like, I just don't know how you can go that far doing mocks.
It's a complete crapshoot of
Yeah,
like
for sure.
who's available and who's not available. Like Dorian Strong goes off at 96. Like, man, yeah, that's a surefire thing. Like, they'd be crazy to not take him at 96. 95 teams passed on him, but he's definitely not getting past the 96th pick. Not getting past the Bears at number 96, right? But yeah, so that's it. Anything else? Any thoughts?
No, the fact you mentioned too, I feel like this is one of those years where there's a lot of uncertainty all around with this draft, and how guys are going to either rise or fall is still a big unknown. I think Cam Ward being the number one pick is probably the only definite we have right now.
I mean, there's definites. It's just like, like I feel like we know a good bit of the top 10. We just don't know exactly where they're going to go, right? But it's like, Cam Ward's going to be the number one pick. Abdul Carter is going to be in there somewhere. Travis Hunter is going to be in there somewhere, right? And it's just a question. It's really, I think the draft starts at 2 with the Browns, because that's the question mark, right? If the Browns take Shedeur Sanders, then that kind of dictates how that round goes. If the Browns take Travis Hunter, then that kind of opens a lot of things up, because if the Browns take Travis Hunter, do the Giants take Shedeur Sanders? If the Giants don't take Shedeur Sanders, then 2 quarterback needy teams have passed on the top quarterback available. And you start to get into like a draft day situation with Bo Callahan. No one went to his birthday party.
Yeah, that to me definitely screams a ton if the Browns and Giants both pass on Shedeur.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's like, okay, what are we missing? Even at number 9, I saw a meme, like, I think we've figured out why people didn't go to Bo Callahan's birthday party, and it's because his agent was Diddy.
I did see that. That was great.
That makes a lot more sense now. I know one went to his birthday party, but and I also saw people saying the Browns should trade back into the end of the first round to get Shedeur Sanders at like 26 or 28. I'm like, man, that sounds like a sequel to Draft Day, which followed the Browns.
And throw in David Putney.
David Putney, who's David? The punter?
No, it was like one of the special teams player that Costner demanded in the trade.
Oh, he's from the movie.
The movie, yeah.
David Putney. I see. I don't know the names that well. You're a little further along than I am. I've only watched it once. Maybe we'll watch it again.
That was sadly a movie I ended up seeing at the theater because me and my wife made it down to French Quarter Fest, and the lines and the crowd was just ridiculous. And I'm like, I'm not putting up with this. And we ended up at the Canal Place movie theater
and watched Draft Day.
Yeah.
The thing that still makes the least sense about that movie to me is how arrogant the Seahawks owner or GM was. That the entire thing was like, you have the number one pick in the draft. That means your team was terrible. How arrogant can you be when you have the worst record in the NFL? Anyway, writing notes at gas stations. Either way, that's the podcast. Right. We're done with the podcast. We're going to move on, get closer and closer. The draft's around the corner. Like, it's like 2 weeks away, which is crazy. It's an earlier draft than I feel like most years it's like the last weekend of April into May. And I don't know if it's because of the way the schedule falls this year, but it's like, what are the days of the draft? Like April 24th. Right. And that makes sense because the next week would be starting in May. And I guess they want to get the draft done in April, but we will have podcasts up until that point. It'll be a good time.
Yeah, I mean, right now we're still in super busy and plenty to talk about mode. It's just when we get to June, July, things taper off.
I mean, I don't think we have plenty to talk about. We just have draft to talk about. Like, that's it.
Yeah, I guess you're kind of saying the same things, a lot of it over and over.
Yeah, right. Well, once we have this is always a frustrating time of year for me because we end up talking about a lot of players that don't play here. Like, I actually don't mind June, July, because we're at least talking about like the play. Like, there's going to be 8-9 new players that we can talk about.
Who's making the roster?
Right, and we can dig into that. Whereas, like, I hate spending time scouting players that never end up playing here. It drives me nuts. It's just wasted energy. But hey, what else are you gonna do? But all right. Who dat? Go Saints. Go Gators. My bracket came in fourth. I beat Steve again. He thought he had it wrapped up. He didn't. He was a duker. You fool. I was a duker too, but I had Duke losing to Florida. So that's how I came from. I was like a horse.
What's funny is I despise Duke. So them losing, I was like, yeah, my bracket's done, but oh well.
Yeah. I was like a horse that's like hanging out in the back of the race the entire time. And I'm just coming around the outside rail. I was like, oh, he might have it. Oh, but he ran out of steam at the end. I was in
just
like
out the money.
I was in like 22nd into the Elite Eight. And then but I came on strong.
No, it says a lot of people, a lot of folks obviously knocked out with that Duke choke job.
I mean, I was confident that Florida was going to, like, that was one of my few things coming in. I was like, Florida's the best team in this tournament. And I don't even know at the end of it, I don't even know if they were, to be honest. I just know that they were the best at winning games in the tournament. And that's
closers, baby.
Closers. That's exactly. I wish the Saints were closers. Maybe the Saints should draft Walter Clayton Jr.
Maybe Kellen can reinstitute some of that closing ability.
That would be nice. But all right. Who dat? Go Saints. Thanks everyone for listening. Hit that subscribe button. Hit me up on Twitter at Jeff_Nowak. You can follow Steve over at Steve Geller WWL. You can follow the show at Saints_pod. Check out WWL.com for all the latest news, notes, and analysis. Otherwise, BZL.
Later, folks.